This is a pretty unique entry into the James Bond books. As I mentioned last time, it is 5 short stories instead of one long one. Liam was planning on making a TV adaptation of the character and wrote 5 episodes for that series. It never happened though, so Ian just decided to pack it up and make it literary adventures. This could have been interesting. While a lot of people would see this as like a real-life adaptation, I'm just kind of imagining if, say, Hanna-Barbera picked it up hot off the heels of Johnny Quest. That, I think, would have been interesting. Imagine an animated James Bond adventure in the style of Johnny Quest. But I'm getting ahead of myself, viewing alternate realities. Seems to be a habit of mine. So, let's go through this one at a time. You might actually be able to recognize some of the titles of the short stories. So we're going to start off with From a View to a Kill. It starts off by vividly describing a lone motorcyclist. It is about 7 o'clock in the morning when all of a sudden there is another cyclist right next to him wearing the same uniform. He decides to slow down. However, this turns out to be the man's last mistake as he is shot down. And it took several days before they were able to recover the body. Meanwhile, Bond is in Paris, just kind of loathing how much the whole city has just gone downhill since the war. He plans on how he's going to spend the rest of his dull evening when a rather exceptional woman double parks her car right in front of the cafe he's at. He figures maybe this could add a little excitement to that dull evening of his. That is, until the woman comes down and sits next to him. It turns out that she is also in the service, and Bond has been requested to go to her superior. Bond does so, to which he gets the scoop. It turns out that several important courier messages have been intercepted, and the couriers have been found dead. M has allowed for Bond to go on this extra assignment, especially going with how abysmal the last one he just came from was. Bond spends several days trying to get any sort of lead whatsoever. And there is one part that just doesn't add up. A gypsy camp that was around the area where the man was found dead. Of course, they disbanded when winter did, but Bond is like, that'd be a perfect way to do it. You could just simply bounce around the country and nobody would question you. So he stakes out the area for several hours. It's a good thing that he did, because from the field that these gypsies were staying at, there is where their base of operations are. It is an underground facility with a periscope that is disguised like a normal flower. The periscope comes up, looks around, and sees what is happening. With this, Bond decides to apprehend these people red-handed. And the way he's going to do it is he's going to take the place of a courier, and then just as he's being captured, he will take care of the fake driver, and then this whole operation will be taken down. His plan mostly comes to fruition. However, it gets to the point where a few of the guards end up overpowering him. And, just like a lovely femme fatale, the woman from earlier is able to kill the person that is holding Bond, and thus he is free. From there, they go digging to see what information has been leaked, as well as where the leak was headed to. And that is the end of From a View to a Kill. As for trying to compare it to Roger Moore's last movie, well, the first thing is, you can see the title was changed A View to a Kill instead of From a View to a Kill. And really, it's just the same name. There is no similarity whatsoever. There's no Max Zorin, which was an experiment of Nazi steroids, who is a megalomaniac that plans on being able to take over the computer world. And yeah, obviously, none of that is found in the first story of this book. The next story is the book's namesake, For your eyes only. It starts off rather peacefully in the estate of the Havelocks. They live in Jamaica, which this has got to be like the third book to take place in Jamaica at this point, where the Havelocks have a wealthy sugar plantation. They have been down there for several generations, and they've been making a ton of money while doing it. Well, one day, a mysterious stranger comes upon the property, saying that he wants to buy the place. Both of the Havelocks look at each other and go, "This place is not for sale. What are you doing?" However, this man just doesn't hear it and brings out a suitcase full of $1 million. Both are just like, "Are you deaf? We told you. We're not selling this place. We're living here. The only way you're going to do this is over our dead bodies." To which his two hitmen in the back start loading up their guns and say, "Is that your final answer?" Mr. Havelock is a little nervous, but he's like, "Yes, that is our answer." And so, both of them are shot dead. And then a few hours later, their only next of kin, Judy Havelock, comes by to see what is left of her parents. M is in a rather crusty mood in his office when he calls Bond in. M is left wondering what to do. That's kind of the problem when you're in charge, is sometimes you have to make decisions that just don't have a good outcome either way. And this is definitely one of those choices. M lays out his cards on the table and tells him what happened. Apparently this hitman that goes by the name of Gonzalez is part of a Cuban nationalist named Hammerstein. Until they figure out who is going to win the war, either Batista or Castro, Hammerstein wanted to buy the Havelock property just in case the whole Cuban regime didn't work out. And with the parents dead, they are going after the daughter to get this luxurious piece of land. In hearing this, Bond's just kind of like, well, they have to pay for this. Those commies can't get away with just killing one of our own, can they? To which M's like, all right, if you're sure about this, this is all strictly off record. And then he takes out a secret stamp from his desk, and it says, "For your eyes only." However, there are a few other people involved in this conspiracy. They traced Gonzalez, as well as Hammerstein, to Echo Lake in Vermont. In order to get there, Bond is going to go through Canada first, which is still under England's jurisdiction at this time. He enlists some help from the RCMP. I hope I'm saying that right. Royal Canadian Mounted Police, if I remember correctly. Gives Bond a weapon, a getaway car, as well as a disguise. Apparently, you can get pretty far in America by just uttering a few phrases like, oh, is that so? Interesting. And then on top of that, he was also told to dye himself head to toe in walnut oil to give him a bit of a darker skin look. Which I guess would make sense. Up in Vermont, there'd be a lot more sun than over in London. So Bond makes his trek there and finds Echo Lake, the location of Gonzalez and Hammerstein. As he's going to scope his area out, he's immediately stopped by Judy Havelock. She had also managed to track Gonzalez down and was planning on killing him with her crossbow. Bond at first is like, now I got this girl to deal with, how am I going to be able to get a clean shot? However, Judy has intense resolve, and she wants to be the one to kill Gonzalez. She doesn't care about this Hammerstein, as she doesn't know him, but she knows who killed her parents. To which Bond is like, okay, I mean, there's a Chinese philosophy that if you're going out for revenge, you must dig 2 graves. To which Judy's like, I don't care. This person wronged my family, and I'm going to avenge him. And unlike the Bond in the movie, he's just kind of like, suit yourself. Alright, so once you get the first shot, I'm going to have to start shooting, so let's go for it. It is a very early morning. and Gonzalez goes out of the house first to dive into the lake. It was a perfect shot. Basically, while in midair, Judy was able to hit Gonzalez right before he hit the water and made the dive. Nobody is suspicious at first until the body all of a sudden rises up with an arrow in its back. It is there that Bond starts shooting like crazy and takes out everybody in the house, except for the servants, which go run for help. Bond then urges Judy to start running with him, to which Judy, she is rather taken back, as this is the first time she's ever had to take a life before. And so Bond has to do a little bit of consoling, basically saying the first time is always the hardest. And there, the pair escape to safety, and the adventure ends. The third story of this book is honestly a bit of a head-scratcher. While the first two I could definitely see as like miniature Bond adventures, this one, well, I guess it would just be easier to explain the story. So Bond is at a rather dull dinner party, waiting for the last few hours where he can board his plane back to London. The assignment he was on brought him to Nassau, which it was a pretty quick and clean job. Basically, there was a smuggler. Bond was able to tap a mine to the bottom of it, blow up the entire ship, and is just about to make his merry way back to London. That's about it. However, Bond is now just in the governor's mansion, just waiting around, trying to strike up any sort of conversation. The only thing he could think of is saying, yeah, in another life, I would have loved to have married a stewardess. To which the governor's like, yeah, that's not really such a good idea. You want to hear a story about it? Bond is like, yeah, I'm bored out of my mind. I could use a story to keep my mind off it. So, somebody in his outfit did end up falling in love with an airline stewardess. It seemed like a pretty happy marriage at first. The woman dreamt of a life of adventure, which this captain was able to provide, and they eventually end up in Nassau. From there, she starts to realize that being the housewife of a colonel just really isn't worth it. So, in order to keep things exciting, she starts cheating on him. Even though this is completely destroying both her reputation but also her husband's. And along the way, his work starts to slip and slip a little more, to which he even tries to commit suicide at one point. However, his superior officer realizes that he needed to go elsewhere, and he did for several months. And it seemed like things are starting to turn around. All of a sudden, the wife realized that what she did was bad, and she's going to basically throw herself at his feet in order to just get everything to go back to the way it was. Well, when he comes home, he basically says, I'm divorcing you. I've had enough of all this. You keep on your half of the house, I'll keep on my half of the house. For the next year, nobody will know that we're getting divorced. By then, I'll have the money to be able to do it, and then we can just finally end this shamble of a marriage. Now, this is where the title of the book comes from, A Quantum of Solace. Quantum meaning quantity or a number, and solace meaning happiness. And the basic idea is that when there is a quantum of solace, both people in a relationship see each other as human. If one of them doesn't see the other as human, then the quantum of solace is gone. And that is very much what happened in this case. So, the year passes, the stewardess is like, well, I need money, otherwise I'm going to be on the street. Fine. You can take the car, and you can take the gramophone. However, he got quite a fair bit of revenge from this, as she goes to turn in the car to realize that it is behind on several payments, and that she owes a few $100s on it. And then, when it comes to the gramophone, the same exact thing. So, he really stuck it to her. But probably the thing that's a little off about this story is that she ends up marrying a wealthy Canadian. Kind of takes away the whole quantum of solace thing. It's like, okay, well, she used up one husband, now she's just moving on to the next. But the story ended, that's it. Aside from that little bit of action in the beginning, I just don't really see how in the world that could have been an episode of anything. Now, as for the movie counterpart itself, a lot like From a View to a Kill, it's really just the namesake. However, when you realize what a quantum of solace is, it actually makes a lot of sense for the film. Basically, this is Bond just trying to get some sort of resolution after the intense death of Vesper. And so he is looking for that quantum of solace. And by the end of the movie, when he finally throws her locket into the snow, he finally found it. But probably the other thing I like to note about this movie as well is in the book adaptation of For Your Eyes Only, there is this idea that Bond knows exactly what it's like to kill a person for the first time. The training will tell you to do this, but that's not what's going to happen. Your blood pressure is going to go up and you're probably just going to freeze. And the main thing is to just drop the gun and get out of there. And that is exactly what happens in this movie. The next story is called Risico, which, according to which source you talk to, the name of the ill-fated third Dalton movie was either going to be called Risico or Property of a Lady, which was also another Ian Fleming short story. For this adventure, Bond is on the tail of a notorious drug smuggling ring that has been crippling the British Empire for years. There is a double agent named Christatos, working through both sides, has been able to figure out where the shipment of all this opium is coming from. Points it to a mysterious character known as the White Dove. This is a rather sweet deal for Christatos. Not only does Christatos say that Columbo needs to be killed, but he also needs a payment of $10,000 in order to keep everybody happy on both sides of the argument. Columbo is in the very restaurant that the pair have met at. And he is there with a very expensive concubine. It's hard to necessarily say prostitute as there isn't any sex involved, but maybe escort would probably be a better term. During the conversation, Columbo goes back and forth. He owns the restaurant, and he has a private room that he's been using to try to get some information on Bond. After getting the information he needed, Columbo then breaks up with the escort in a very horrific fashion, making such a scene in front of the restaurant. Bond then decides to pump her for information, to which she says that she will meet him out on the sands of Italy. Bond gets there, he finds that it is a very desolate place. The only thing that's around is just intense, sweltering sun, the sand, and perhaps the few odd gun emplacements from World War II. Bond is going under the guise that instead of being a secret agent, he is a writer, and he wants to try to write a new story about drug smuggling. And since she was rather intimate with Columbo, he figures that that's where he can get this information. To which she doesn't offer a whole lot whatsoever, when all of a sudden a few goons start to give chase to him. Unfortunately, one of them ends up getting blown up because of an old minefield that nobody had the chance to be able to dig up. From there, Bond is able to make his way to a few frog fishermen, as I'm going to call them. Basically, they're like head to toe in rubber. He tries to explain their situation, and Columbo comes forward and knocks him out. When he comes to, he realizes that the cabin he is in is actually not all that bad. If he was being held prisoner, he would be in much worse quarters. From there, he meets up with Columbo, where he brings out a single tape recorder and presses play. Goes over all the minutes with him and Christados. And it gets to the point where Bond agrees to kill Columbo. To which Columbo's just like, Christados, he's the one that's the real double agent. He's the one smuggling all this stuff, and he's the one betraying you. After a lot of back and forth, Bond is convinced, but he wonders why on earth all this charade in order to talk with him. To which Columbo's like, my competitor sent you out on a hit to kill me. You think I could just go up to you and say, hey, I may be a smuggler, but I'd never smuggle any of these drugs. That is beyond my morality. The only thing I'll really smuggle in is like penicillin or aspirin, but not opium. That is just a disgusting business. Columbo then even offers Bond some proof that Christados is the one that's giving all this opium away. They set sail for a warehouse in the middle of nowhere. As soon as they land, there is an intense battle where what looks like rolled up tubes of newsprint turns out to be the vessel of opium. Bond sees that there is a stray bullet hole. When the sap starts to pull out, Bond takes it, takes a taste, and realizes that, yep, that is indeed the real stuff. As this battle is going on, Bond is able to take out a machine gunner, which was able to save countless lives for Columbo's men, but not before Christados himself pulls up. Bond tries his best to hide away in the shadows, but Christados was able to see him, and so Bond takes a pose to take the shots that he can, and he's able to hit Christados. But instead of slowing down, he just keeps going faster and faster with his arm right out the window, looking like he's constantly turning left. From there, Columbo embraces Bond and thanks him for the help on this assignment. And Columbo even says, you know what, this wasn't just for me. You've destroyed at least a year's worth of opium in your country, and that should be a great debt for you. But when you have to write up the report, try not to mention me, okay? This then brings us to our last story, the Hilderbrand Rarity. A lot like Quantum of Solace, this one is questionable as to how on earth this was going to work as a TV episode. In all honesty, it just comes across as more of like a Sherlock Holmes story. So Bond just finished up an assignment at the, hope I'm saying it right, the Seychelles. It is a group of islands just north of Madagascar. Essentially, he was sent there for kind of a feasibility study to see how well protected the Navy would be against an attack, to which Bond does the assignment and says, yeah, unless they sent a massive force, you're good. So he's just there on the island, just waiting for the next few days for a ship to take him to Mombasa, and then from there he'll just go back to London to his usual routine. While he's there, he decides to take out an evil-looking stingray. What's interesting, they really go into detail about the stingray. Apparently, in more cruel times, the tails were used for whips. Which, this is something I had to look up. I didn't really find a whole lot to suggest that this was a thing, but in looking up what a stingray's tail can look like, yeah, that'd be quite painful. And it's interesting to note that this little detail made it into License to Kill, or at least from what little I have seen in the movie. Yeah, I guess I should probably go a little bit for a confession here. I have yet to see the entirety of License to Kill. In all honesty, it scared me away. I got to about the scene where Felix is about to be lowered into the shark tank. Basically, I just had to turn it off when, as an appetizer for the shark, there is just a garbage bag full of the skinned remains of what was supposed to be Felix's wife. Yeah, I don't deal with that kind of stuff very well. And on top of that, there was like 20 minutes into the movie, I didn't even get to the point where the main villain ends up being set on fire and one of the henchmen's head just explodes. Yeah, it's gonna be a while before I can build up the bravery to be able to see this through to the end. People tell me it's great, but yeah, it's too extreme for my liking. But anyway, getting back to it, Bond is able to take this stingray up, which one of the locals comes by. I believe it'd be pronounced Felipe Barbie. Seeing the stingray, he's just like, oh, he got a good one right there. It's gonna take a few hours before this thing dies, right? Do you want its tail for anything? To which Bond's like, nah, I don't have an unruly wife to use it on. Which, after the whole slave trade thing ended, apparently that was a very popular custom in the area. So it even got to a point where these whips were outright banned in the Seychelles because it was just too painful. I really keep getting off track on this. Let's try to focus on the story. So this Barbie comes forward and says there is this rich man named Hilton Crest. He wants your help with something, and since you're stuck here for a few days, figured why not jump on the assignment? After all, he's a very rich person, he'll pay you, and you get to ride on probably the most luxurious yacht you'll ever see in the world. Felipe was not lying, and while the lines on the outside to Bond showed a very ugly craft, the inside was probably the most beautiful interior I've ever seen. In fact, it was more like walking in a luxurious mansion than on a ship. While he enjoys the luxury, he just kind of looks at it with a bit of distaste, like, this guy not only can sail the waters, but he's basically giving him the finger, saying, I'm going to be as comfortable as possible, and make it seem unlike any other ship. But at the same time, the crewmates, given great accommodations, usually reserved for the captain's quarters on other ships. They meet their host, to which they find out very quickly that this Milt Crest, he's... trying to figure out what the best word to describe him would be. I'm just gonna say he's a dick. I think that just about covers... You know what? A dork. Because a dork is the scientific name for whale penis, which just means really big dick. And getting introduced is just like, Jim, right? And he calls Felipe Fido. Of course, his wife tries her best to basically say that this is just how he is. Don't read too much into it. He just loves trying to get at people's goats, that's all. He gives them the assignment, and they are after an exceptionally rare fish, part of the squirrel fish genus, called the Hilderbrand Rarity. There has only ever been one caught before, and it was found on a local reef island, which they're going to head there now. As the journey continues, we realize that, yeah, this Crest is just a dork. Not only does he have one of the illegal whips by the bedside, which he is proud to say he has used on his wife on several occasions, but on top of that, the only reason he is doing this is for a tax credit. Essentially, he found the Crest organization, which is dedicated to marine biology, which was just a way of being able to get this extremely lavish ship built for free. However, the Institute is just like, it doesn't seem like you're returning a whole lot. You probably better return something, otherwise you're going to have to pay for all that stuff out of pocket. To which Mr. Crest is like, fine, I'll get you your stupid specimens. And that's the last one on the list. Group make it to a rather desolate island and try their best to search for it. Bond and Felipe circle the island several times, and find nothing of the Hilderbrand Rarity. Milt then says, well, why don't you just take a break for lunch? I'll take a look myself. No more than 10 minutes in, he's just like, I found it. It took you nearly 3 hours and several passes, but I found it. I am the one that is fantastic, while you suck at your job. Like I said, dork. Now, how in the world they capture the Hilderbrand Rarity is just as disgusting as Milt Crest. Essentially, he has this jar of Amazonian poison. Basically, it just kills any fish within its line of sight. He pours it all over the water, which just kills everything, including the Hilderbrand Rarity. Bond is able to catch it and then gives it to Milt Crest. They decide to do a little bit of partying, seeing that they finally got this last part of the scavenger hunt. It is there that we also see that Milt also does not know when to put the bottle down. He drinks a ton, and he gets enraged, even more so than before. The wife, at this point, has really started to let on to the idea that Milt is not a very good husband to her, and, as stated, has beat her on several occasions. In a drunken stupor, Milt is just like, I see you talk to my wife, you trying to take her away from me? To which Bond is just like, calm down, you drunk. Oh, calm down. You see this whistle right here, buddy? If I blow this, everybody on this crew throw you overboard, and then I'm going to reverse the motor and make you into chum for the sharks. You got me, buddy? To which James is just like, okay, sheesh. I'm happy we understand each other. Come on, honey, we are going to bed. Like I said, dork. One big whale dick. At night, Bond attempts to fall asleep, but there are just so many distractions. Now, he can deal with the noise of the motor, but not only is he just filled with all this rage for Mr. Crest, but by the time he was able to get that out of his mind, he all of a sudden hears the screams of his wife being whipped. Bond is left pacing his cabin trying to figure out if he should intervene or not. Keeps chalking it up to, these are personal affairs, not my own. I shouldn't get involved. But he knows that this is something that she could easily win if there was ever a lawsuit with. But she is just too timid of a person to be able to do anything about it. Well, Bond is able to get that out of his mind when Milt decides to go to sleep on a hammock on the edge. To which Bond is just going out of his mind as it's like 2 o'clock in the morning and he just will not stop snoring. He is trying his best to fall asleep when all of a sudden he just hears a disturbed gurgling noise, followed by no more snoring. Bond decides to investigate to find that the Hilderbrand Rarity has been lodged within Milt's throat. And if that wasn't gruesome enough, apparently the squirrelfish has some really sharp spines all over its back, which were protruding out through the neck. But this, Bond knows that anyone on the ship could be held responsible for this and go to jail for a very long time. So Bond decides to cut the hammock and then throw the big dick of Milt Crest into the ocean, where he will be reunited with the other whale penises. Back on shore, it takes a while for them to realize that Milt is missing. It's the wife that first makes the discovery, and she starts getting quite hysterical about it. At the mainland at Seychelles, Felipe has a lot of connections with the court system. He's able to push the trio through the system in all about under an hour, as he's got like a judge and a jury in his right pocket. It's here that Bond, as well as us as the readers, are wondering who was the one that did in Milt Crest. Was it Felipe because in the drunken stoop he completely insulted his entire family, and I guess revenge runs in his race, as they say in the book, but I'm just going to say it runs in his family because I feel like that is a lot more respectable. And there's definitely the wife who has had a lot of reason to kill her husband in such a brutal way. There is a hint that it might have been the wife that did it, but it's left to be a mystery. And that is where the book ends. Now, as for the movie itself, it is very much a mixture of Risico and the title story, For Your Eyes Only. But they throw in this idea of an ATAC in there as well. Basically a way to be able to figure out where all the nuclear submarines are at NATO. We still get the daughter of Havelock murdering Gonzalez, but instead of her name being Judy, it's Melina for some reason. The other thing as well is that the death of Christatos is a bit more built up in the movie, where they end up doing battle on a monastery for the ATAC machine, because at this point the opium warehouse had already been destroyed. And the head of USSR intelligence, General Gogol, attempts to go there to pick up the ATAC machine, but Bond throws it off into the ravine, completely destroying it, claiming it's détente. I've probably alluded to this before in other reviews, but in terms of the Bond movies, For Your Eyes Only, I think is the worst one. I just found it so unbelievably dull, especially with the idea of this ATAC being the mythical MacGuffin. They finally get it, and then they just end up destroying it at the end. But I will admit, there is one very interesting factoid about this movie. Now, I'm not sure if other people have heard this rumor or not, but it was just one of those urban legends that one of the Bond girls was a trans woman. Well, there is actually some truth to that. Not to say that it is a main Bond woman or anything, but there is a scene in this movie where Gonzalez is relaxing in his pool, surrounded by a whole bunch of beautiful women. And one of them was a very famous trans model known as Toulouse. And it's really fun seeing the behind the scenes of it, because the director, as well as the cast and crew, just didn't know about it until a while after the movie came out, and then all of a sudden it was like, ooh, it was controversial. But the director, in finding this out, was just kind of like, I don't care. She was one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen. But yeah, that's about the only thing I find interesting about this movie besides the all-out attack on the opium warehouse. There are like a few other scenes here and there that a lot of people talk about the idea of Roger Moore pushing the car over the cliff being a bit of a highlight. For me, I'm just kind of like, okay. I mean, I can see why that's shocking, because Roger Moore is the more campy kind, and that seems more like something Lazenby or Sean Connery would have did. But yeah, in general, I don't like this movie. So, that is For Your Eyes Only. Join me next time for what promises to be a very unique review. The Spy Who Loved Me. Until next time, keep having fun.